So in order for me to back up the bold claim I've just made, we have to talk about Battlefield and what Battlefield is. It's a tough one. The question of what is Battlefield is more difficult to answer than you might think. When we talk about a multiplayer FPS, a big chunk of it is about the game modes. Battlefield's game mode was Conquest. 2 teams, however many flags on a huge map, whoever controls more flags loses less quickly. It's rather straightforward, it's very wishy-washy. It's like drinking a bottle of LaCroix, like thinking about this particular shade of grey. It's like the Milgram experiment, but instead of electric shocks, it's sort of more of a gentle buzz. The flags are not really there as objectives in the traditional sense, they're there to provide some veneer of context to your battles. A reason why all of these tanks and planes and soldiers should be butting heads. Instead of placing 64 players on a huge map and going, alright friends, team deathmatch, good luck, the flags in Conquest are there to draw players in like moths to a battlefieldy flame. What results is best described as a kind of sandbox. The developers have given you a bunch of stuff, and the enjoyment of Conquest is in watching all of this stuff interact. It's not particularly demanding, but you still have to pay some kind of attention. This is what Battlefield was known for, and everyone lived in harmony until the Bad Company Nation attacked. God, that was really bad. I'm sorry, I'm cutting that out. So a warning for this part, we're gonna pretend that the original Bad Company didn't exist because I didn't play it. In 2010, DICE were charged with taking a proper stab at a Battlefield game for console. Not a PC port this time, but a game designed entirely around Gen 7. Unfortunately, there was a problem. These consoles weren't up to the task of emulating the fully fledged 64-player expansive Battlefields of Conquest, along with all of the other cool stuff DICE wanted to put in. Instead, the developers looked inwards. They could only fit 24 players in a single server. They would have to fundamentally rethink what Battlefield was. The result? Battlefield Bad Company 2. Man, it's weird that they started at 2. I wonder what that's about. Some of what made Battlefield was still there. There were classes and tanks and helicopters, but when it came to the game mode, when it came to Conquest, that was where it took a turn. 24 players just isn't enough to recreate the Conquest that you would find in the older games. It would exist in Bad Company 2, but in a rather bare-bones form, only 3 flags on a much smaller map. The developers needed something new that would fit the rest of the game. The identity of Bad Company 2 isn't Conquest, it's Rush. In Rush you have 2 MCOMs, these little terminal things right here. It's the job of the attackers to attack these sites by planting a bomb at and blowing up both of them. The defenders are there to stop that from happening. Once both sites are blown up, the defenders fall back to a new pair of sites. The attackers have a limited amount of lives. If it reaches 0, the defenders win. If the attackers clear through every pair of sites the map has to offer, the attackers win. Already a little bit more complicated, a little bit more involved. There's a direct objective here for the team to focus on. Instead of the developers giving you a bunch of stuff and watching it interact, they've given you a bunch of stuff and explicitly told you to do a thing. Rush marks a departure away from the sandbox feel of Battlefield and towards a more competitive game. There's much more emphasis on teamwork. Less players paradoxically means that both your actions matter more and that your team needs to work together. Whether or not this is good is up to you. It's obviously not the original Battlefield experience, so if you're after that, it's understandable if you're not a fan. In my opinion, this worked really well for the time, but a lot of it is based off of the spectacle. We take it for granted now, but back then a combined arms multiplayer shooter is not something the console gaming crowd, myself included, had ever seen before. You could easily dismiss the flaws of Bad Company 2 just from the sheer amount of cool stuff there was. Look, there's a motion sensor you can use to find people. Look, you can collapse an entire building. Look, there's a fucking tank. It's easy to underestimate just how much Battlefield Bad Company 2 thrived off of stuff that was cool. The revive mechanic, while ubiquitous in most games nowadays, was a genuine novelty back then. Also, listen to the guns. This all worked very well for DICE. Perhaps too well. Battlefield Bad Company 2 was the best-selling game in the series by far. They found a new market of players on console and... Okay, we're gonna have to check out this quote, right, from an interview.
With a design decision, you stick with an objective, and this one was a bit of a faster-paced version of Battlefield. So this flavor doesn't represent the future of Battlefield, it just represents how we wanted to set up this experience.
There's a small problem with this in, they said that before the game sold 5 million copies, so what do you do now? You have a holdout of die-hard fans that want the large-scale wishy-washy nature of Conquest, and you also have a now core audience of players that are used to smaller-scale competitive skirmishes. And thus the future of Battlefield, let's be honest, kind of goes into the bin a little bit because they tried to opt for both. It's a series with an identity crisis. I'm not sure what to tell you when you ask me the question, what is Battlefield? It's a series where one foot doesn't quite know what the other one is doing. How do you design all of these maps, weapons, entire classes when they're being used for fundamentally different game modes? This has culminated in Battlefield 2042, a game that feels incredibly confused. They've just hodgepodged the class system back in. Yeah, apparently they removed that for some reason. The specialists, now no longer the focus, feel like extra baggage. The maps are way too big, a lot of them are in the process of being reworked, and like, okay, you know what, enough of this nerd shit, this is too depressing, let's talk about the final. Embark Studios are a Stockholm-based development team mostly headed up by ex-DICE veterans, and I do mean veterans, look, they even got Patrick Söderlund. Remember him? That's a name I definitely looked up how to pronounce before I started recording this video. And there's a reason why I waffled on so much about Bad Company 2, because it represented a fork in the road for the series, where Battlefield picked up both of these aspects and tried to drag them like a heavy cart. The final specifically picks up where Bad Company 2 left off, and its emphasis on teamwork, its destructible environments and smaller scale chaotic skirmishes, and carries it across the finish line. Or should I say the Swedish line? More concretely, it's 4 squads of 3 players, 12 in total, thrown into a medium-ish sized maps with a 2-tiered objective. A. Steal 1 of 2 vaults of cash on the map. B. Take that vault to a cash out point and defend it until the cash out completes. Repeat this until the round is over. You're rewarded cash for successfully doing a cash out, among other smaller things. By the way, don't get wiped unless you want to lose half your cash. And the squad with the most cash at the end wins. It's kind of like if, instead of Bad Company 2 innovating on Search and Destroy, they decided to innovate on King of the Hill. And yeah, it's easy to make the Battlefield comparisons. The buildings are all destructible and you play the game with squads. The game mode is objective based and there's a class system, each with their own benefits and drawbacks, hosting a treasure trove of different gadgets and grenades. Sounds pretty Battlefield to me, right? Well, yeah, okay, no genre fuckery for this video at least, but I also feel like this game is the anti-Battlefield. It's everything that Battlefield isn't in that it actually seems to deliver on the premise of its marketing. What do I mean by that? Well, Battlefield is a series that has been pretty much designed by its marketing. Instead of having some kind of basis in game design fundamentals, the series is largely about how it's going to be sold. Short, snippy taglines, Levolution, every building is destructible, you can work together as a team. There are 64, or even in some cases 128 players all fighting at once. The problem is that this isn't really how games are normally designed, right? Battlefield Bad Company 2, I mentioned earlier that it had flaws. Bad Company 2 was sold on its destructive environments. You can collapse any building you want. Well, it turns out some of these buildings have the MCOM stations in them, you know, the little things you need to defend or blow up. So if the building collapses, yeah, you lose the objective. What do you do to stop this? Instead of having to actually take over the site, you can just fire potshots at it with a tank from a mile away. The idea of you can collapse any building does not survive contact with the reality of it not being a sound competitive experience. It's no surprise that they removed it from future entries. Every time you hear the entire game is all one shot, or you can explore 50 billion unique planets, you have to consider how that actually works within the confines of the game. How does that actually make the game better? It has to be a core part of the game's design. The Finals has managed to do what Battlefield could not, which is take the marketing tagline of every building is destructible and actually weave it into the fabric of the game. It's a mechanic, and if you're sitting there thinking, well, it was a mechanic in Bad Company 2, then no, it wasn't. Take a look at this cash out station. You'll notice that when playing that this cash out station is an object. It's not locked in place, it can move around. You might think it's a curious bit of game design at first, but it's like that for a reason. If it's in a building, then a common tactic for attack is to collapse the floor that this cash out station is on to catch the enemy by surprise. The game encourages you to abuse its destructive capabilities in order to win. Another point about this is that the building layouts themselves are confusing. They're huge, towering labyrinths. Again, you might think this is just a case of all the good map designers in Stockholm being blipped out of existence, but no, it's to encourage the use of destruction to create your own doors. It's not long before you're thinking about building destruction as a means to play the game, rather than a distant memory you saw on a trailer. The Finals is a game that takes the potential of Battlefield and actually considers the design in order to reach it. Look at the server counts, for example. Battlefield 2042 maxes out at a whopping 128 players, but bigger isn't always better. The number of players you can have in a server at once shouldn't be a technical decision, it's a design decision. 128 players on a single server may sound cool in theory, it sounds cool as a line to feed to the games media, but put it in practice and it's a mess, it's ridiculous, it's borderline unplayable. You can't make any meaningful decisions, it's just too chaotic. You can be shot from anywhere on the map and you have little to no impact on the actual state of the game. The finals doubles down on Bad Company 2's philosophy in this regard, quite literally only 12 players on a server, and it's such a sensible decision for many different reasons. It's already chaotic enough that there's no need to add any more players into the mix. There's 2 objectives, so in most cases there'll always be one squad fighting another squad at any time. The game actually falls apart a bit if the team leaves. The balance is rather delicate in that regard, but there's more to these player counts than how the game plays out. Having only 2 other teammates does more to realise a certain premise of Battlefield that, in my opinion, has never been met. That is, to make players work together as a team. Come on, let's face the music here. When was the last time you played Battlefield and it truly felt like you were working together? When you didn't feel like you had to do everything yourself? There were entire community movements dedicated to getting people to play the objective, and it didn't really work. I spent the better part of an entire decade fine-tuning the scores for doing actions as a squad, adding the commander mode back in for a bit, having Lord knows how many of these little ping wheels before realising it's just not going to happen. You can barely get people to work together in Counter-Strike, and people who play that game actually own microphones. This is simply a battle that the developers of the finals couldn't win, so they simply didn't bother. The squads are now 3 players instead of 4, and there's no part contribution here, where your squad is working towards a greater effort. You are the entire team. There's a ping system where you can ping objectives and points on the map, and that's it. Now, you're probably wondering how all of this actually goes towards fixing the problem. Putting entire systems to encourage teamwork in the bin sounds like it doesn't get players to work together. And you're right, and that's the point. And stick with me here, because this means that you don't have a choice anymore. You can't solo queue this game. I mean, you can, but I don't really recommend it. You have to find 2 of your friends to play with. There's not really much extrinsic motivation for working in a team in so much as if you don't, you're going to lose. The teamwork premise of the finals can only be realised if you're actually working as a team. And you can only work as a team if you're in a Discord call with 2 other fleshy human beings that you know. That's all you need. You don't need 3 or 4 other players like you do with other online games, you just need 2. It's a bit more realistic in terms of expectations. I forced some of my Dota 2 stack at gunpoint to play, and lo and behold, we had a great time. So what kind of niche does the finals actually fill? It's all very well that it expands and ultimately delivers on the concept of Bad Company 2, but that was over a decade ago. Does that still hold up in today's world of Fortnite, Overwatch and Battle Passes? Well, the game does have a Battle Pass, so don't panic in that regard. What the finals is the return of the game night. A game that is just competitive enough that you feel fulfilled when you and your 2 buddies work together, while also being casual enough that you don't feel too bad if you lose. A game where if you have to duck out suddenly, no problem, not the end of the world. A game where you can play a round, and then play another round, and then play another round, and then, oh god, it's 12 AM, what happened? Like, man, I love this game, I'll fully admit it, I've fallen into the trap, there's definitely flaws, but I'm not going to talk about them here. I love the class design, I love how each one feels reasonably balanced and can fill multiple niches. I love thinking about different team compositions and which gadget is the best for what situation. I loved how varied each map is to the point where there's still tricks that I'm learning about them 10 hours in. I love how one class has a medigun, but also a high-powered assault rifle. Peak game design right there. I'm fully immersed in the honeymoon period right now. I'm trying to enjoy the game before it becomes optimized by the player base and the matchmaking pits us off against the lamest human beings imaginable. I'm allowing myself to get excited about a video game. I know there's something wrong with me. And like, sure, the finals might not be able to stick the landing on its release. It might go the way of other multiplayer FPS games that I love so much. But right now, it's all I can think about. And I'm trying to enjoy it for as long as I can. Hello, guess who forgot to write an outro for this bit? Spoilers, I do actually write these outros despite how confused I sound, because it's a lot easier to make subtitles, but I guess I'm just going to have to deal with that. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much to Zolty Boy for the thumbnail. It looks really cool, I'm sure. I've not seen it yet. That's exciting. I'm living in a world where I've not seen a thumbnail. Thank you very much to Kevin from Pixelit for doing the developer interview quote. Also, I've probably made a post about this at some point, but I'll say it here. I've seen like 1 or 2 comments who are sort of slightly, maybe a little bit interested in sort of the process of making videos, and they've sort of expressed, you know, oh yeah, I'd love to make videos like these, but I'm not really sure what to do. So a quick sales pitch. Basically, I feel like there's a lot of information out there about how to sort of technically make videos, right? It's very easy, you just sort of download Audition and Premiere or like whatever, that part's sort of easy and very accessible and sort of, YouTube tutorial, like if you want to learn how to do something in a video editing software, you could just Google it. But there's not a lot of information out there on actually sort of the creative part, say the writing of the script. And obviously there's probably a good reason for that, but at the same time, I kind of wanted to put some resources out there to hopefully help people, or at the very least sort of give an insight into my process of making these videos, I guess specifically writing them. All of this is to say I've started a new channel, Video Games Are Badder, and there I have got a sort of almost like a diary or like a chronologue, a retrospective of the Far Changing Tides video, the Wind Pushes You Back video. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, I'll link it somewhere. And when I say somewhere, I mean the description, because that's the only place I can really link things. Yeah, that's it. That's probably quite a long outro, so I'm probably going to cut this a bunch to make it a bit shorter, including what I'm saying right now. So yeah, goodbye.